welcomed at our Bro Nouveau podcast, the podcast that models healthy communication for men, empowering them to start their journey of self-work. Now here's your host, Thomas Pierce.
All right, we're going. Jevon, good morning. Welcome to the Bro Nouveau podcast.
Hey, good morning, Thomas. Thanks for having me, man. Love the name, by the way.
Nice, thanks. I can't take credit. I just someone suggested it, and then I kept it. I kept it in the back of my mind for a few years.
Yeah, well, that's whoever it was, man. They're good at marketing and stuff for sure.
Yeah,
cool name.
Thanks, dude. Awesome. So, Jevon, at the beginning of the pods, I always like to bring it back and kind of hear about people's early influences and where they came from. So, I know you're in Houston right now. Did you grow up in Texas as well?
No, man. I actually grew up in Rochester, New York, upstate New York.
Oh, cool.
So I've been around. I've moved from Rochester to Atlanta to the DMV area. I've lived overseas. Well, not lived overseas, but I was deployed overseas to Kuwait, Afghanistan, back to DC. I've been all over the place, man. Just finally decided I wanted to settle in. Came here to Houston, Texas about a year and a half ago.
Awesome, man. So in the Mideast, were you with the armed forces?
Yep. I was with the Army. So I did 12 years in reserves. 4 of those were active.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you for your service. That's awesome.
Oh, thanks for the support, man. Appreciate you.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. So upstate New York. So, because I'm kind of I love music and I love hip hop too. And actually, I've been recently been listening to Talib Kweli and Questlove both have podcasts where like they go deep on kind of like they're both East Coast guys, but musical history and musical influences. So in upstate New York, would you be getting the same kind of musical influences coming from the city, or was it a different kind of vibe up there?
No, we definitely get that influence. And actually, one of my brothers, he's a huge musician. His name is Riggs. He has the group, The Cloth. And if you like that type of hip hop, he's actually still rapping that way. Right now, cool. It seems like everyone sounds the same a little bit, but he still has that old school New York feel to him. So that's the person you might want to check out too, Thomas.
Nice, for sure. I will. Yeah, I just think it's interesting because I feel like the music that we grew up with influences us somehow, whether it be subconscious or for people like your brother, maybe much more intentional.
Yeah, for sure. You get influenced by so many different ways. You have the societal influences, you have the parental or the guardianship influences, you have your friends, family, your different social groups. So, or like you said, whether you know it or not, you're getting all this information and all these, ideologies and beliefs, being shaped by all these different sources.
For sure, man. So nowadays you're on the mindset message, to summarize it succinctly, and from what I read about your bio, it seems like you had a shift or a moment when you decided to take a more active control of your life and your direction, and that was a very positive experience, and now you're motivated to share it. So can you build us a backstory there as far as what was going on in your life at that point and what happened?
Yeah, for sure, man. For sure. Good question. And speaking of influences, I come from a very impoverished area, in Rochester, New York. Grew up, we didn't have money, any of that, raised on food stamps. And my mother was just trying to make a way. So I actually was raised in a polygamous household where my mom was wife number 2 of 2. And then, her husband had another wife and family on the other side. So as you can imagine, that impacts 1, love, and then 2, being a young man, trying to identify, what that meant, what being a man meant, etc. So my views were kind of skewed by that, and just the environment. So I would say that before I got on this mindset journey, I wasn't being shaped by my efforts. I was being shaped by my environment, which unfortunately many of us have that experience. And it takes some type of aha moment or wake up call for you to kind of change that and see with your third eye or your mind. So at 17, I tried to take matters into my own hands. I was really tired of having, 2 pairs of shoes for the school year, a couple pair of jeans, and maybe 5, 6 shirts for the year. So I was like, hey, I'm gonna get money. I started working. I had always had a job, but we know you're not getting paid much as a 15, 16-year-old, right? You get the chump change. And I hit the streets, and I ended up getting caught up, and I got arrested for an assault and robbery charge at 17. And when I got arrested, I didn't realize the gravity of that situation. I'm sitting in there. I'm like, whatever. Even when the judge told me what I was facing, which was 7 years in prison with the big boys, right? I was being charged as an adult. It didn't hit me until my mom and my older sister came to visit me one day. And this was like after a few weeks of being in there. In jail, and just seeing that the pain that I had caused. Here was 2 people who really were my world. They really were the only reasons that I cared was my family. So that woke me up, and that was when I finally just had a prayer moment with God that I actually meant. I was praying. I grew up in an Islamic family, so you pray 5 times a day, but I didn't mean any of that. Right? I didn't mean anything I said. I was just doing it because that's what I was told I had to do. Right. But this time, when I went back to my cell after that visit, I got on my hands and my knees, and I meant every single word when I asked him to just help me out of this situation. And I told him that I would be a servant for him if he just got me out. And of course, at 17, you don't know what that means. Right. I don't know what resources I had because I thought money was everything. And over the years, I realized that it wasn't, because by the grace of God, I didn't have to do 7 years, which is why I'm here talking to you today. So that was really my wake up call to the power of mindset and the power of belief. Just seeing that, there is a higher power that can help you out, but you have to do your part too, is the real key.
Amazing. Wow. What a story. That's so cool, man. Thank you. Incredible. Okay, there's a few things I'd love to learn more about there. So, going back to the household growing up, the polygamous household, pretty interesting. And it seems like looking back, you don't have a great impression of it, or it's not a lifestyle you would choose for yourself. Perhaps I sense some not judgmental, but a little bit like, I saw that and it wasn't that chill. So what about that?
Right.
What about that kind of didn't work for you?
I think for me, maybe, some people make it work because it's more well explained and more well planned, I guess. But for me, I looked at it in a way where I felt like my mom kind of was like giving up, and she was just tired. And that's why I kind of felt like a settle there. As a kid, that's how I was looking at it, because here it was, the woman, my first love is my mother. And just seeing her, of course, she thinks she's the most beautiful woman and, the strongest woman, and she's done so much. And when you see that, it's just like, what caused that? What caused her to just want to be, another one. And that's how I was feeling at that time. And I actually had a conversation with my mother a few years ago about why, the whole reason. And that really was it. She was just like, hey, at that time, I really needed help, right? I did not want y'all to end up in the streets. I didn't want us to end up homeless. I was tired of dealing with men who were cheating, who were beating me, who were doing all these other things. And here it was, this man, I knew what he was doing. I knew he had another family, but I also knew that he would take care of us, and I would not have to worry about him laying hands. I would not have to worry about him mistreating us. So that's what it was. And that was probably maybe about 5 years that I had that discussion. So it was an interesting perspective shift. And I would say, to each his own, really. Like if that works for some people, cool. But just make sure that the children understand what that is and what that means, and really plan to have it where they're receiving the love and the care and attention that's required of a family. Because when you have to split that time, or it's really tough to give them that attention and let them know, why that is. Be transparent about the whole situation as much as you can. So that's what I would say with that.
Nice. Yeah, well said, man. That's a brave conversation to have with your mom.
Yeah. But those tough conversations really help build relationships. A lot of people tend to avoid those, but those really are the ones that fortify the relationships. I feel like the ones that, you feel a little weird, bringing it up. Those are the ones that really say, we're not just on the surface here with this. This is deeper, and we're building this connection where there are no secrets here. There are no reasons why we need to hide who we are. We're really talking about, the essence of us, the essence of our being, why we make certain decisions. I think it's just very important to have those conversations, no matter what level a relationship is. If you have a question, if you have a feeling, if something, just didn't align with it, you let people know, because you never know what that conversation may lead to.
Totally. And I've observed too that if someone's having that feeling or the hesitation and they push through it, they're probably one of the very few people on this earth who will have that tough conversation with that other individual.
Right.
Which is so valuable.
Right. And you really learn not just about the other person, but about yourself in those types of conversations. Like you said, a lot of people will avoid that, and they'll be like, what? I don't want to talk about that. Or, why are you asking me to try to shift the conversation? So I gave my mother kudos. As I said earlier, she's one of the strongest people I knew. And she's always been willing to have that type of conversation. It was just up to me to ask. And it took me a while to really, I was like, do I really want to know this? Right? Do I really want to hear this? You got to ask yourself that, to be honest. Like, it sounds good when you're thinking about it. Like, man, I want to ask her this. But then you start thinking like, do I want to hear this story?
Yeah.
And do I want to bring that up for her? Because it could be a pain point. But it was something that I felt was necessary in my growth as a person. So I was so glad that she was willing to sit down and speak with me about it. And there were other things she had to speak about with me too, because my last name is Wooden, and I'm the only Wooden in my family. Now, I'll tell you this story. I have a lot of stories for sure. So I am actually, my mother named me after a guy, and his name was Sam Wooden. My middle name is Samuel. And this guy came to see me while I was at my aunt's house. I used to go over there a lot. She was the mother to my favorite cousin, and I was there. And he came. It had to be like 11 o'clock at night, man. I don't even know what time. I was young. I see dark. I just think it's late. So I had to be like 8, 9, or somewhere around that age. And here's this guy, and my aunt lets him in. So I'm like, okay, this guy's cool, And he sits on the couch with me. He says, "Hey, I'm your dad." And I'm looking at him. Oh. Now, mind you, I didn't know who my father was. Like, there's no name on my birth certificate. I didn't know. So I'm like, "You're my dad." And I'm looking at this guy. I'm like, I know biologically, people look different. You can't tell by that. But as a kid, you're like, okay, you're tall. Why am I short? Give me some of your height, So I'm just looking at him like, well, why the heck didn't I get some of your features? What the heck is going on? And the next day, I go over his house. I'm like, okay, maybe he is my dad. My mom's letting me go. My aunt's letting me go. Cool. And I go there, and I remember it vividly. I was playing chess on a Nintendo. He had other kids running around. I was like, okay, cool. So this is my dad. This is great. I was happy. Never seen the guy ever again. Never seen him again after that.
What?
No, never seen him again. And a couple years after that, I was probably about 13 or 14. I had asked my mother, who was that? Because I never seen him. What happened to him? And why is my last name Wooden? And she said words, which is probably played into me struggling to ask her the question I asked her before. I asked her, like, why is my last name Wooden? Who was that? Or who's my father? And she was like, well, there was a mistake, right? But as a kid, when you hear that, you're like, okay, does that mean I'm a mistake? So I carried that with me. You know, I know she didn't mean that, and she didn't remember even saying that when I asked her, you know, as an adult. And those are those moments you have to be mindful as a parent or as someone who's getting asked that question. Now, of course, she didn't mean it. She didn't think anything of it. But that I carried with me for years, the fact that she said it was a mistake. And that's why I said, like, when you have those conversations, you got to ask, like, am I ready for whatever the response is? So because it could be something like that, and there's ambiguity there, and you can interpret it, though, you know, especially as a young man,
as a kid. Yeah.
So you have to be mindful of that. But, you know, later on in that same conversation, when I asked her about being in a polygamous relationship, we talked about this, and she was saying, again, she just didn't know what to do. There's no manual to being a parent. So she was trying to do literally everything she could. You know, she wasn't thinking about how that can affect me later. She was thinking about the situation she was in then. So she was literally just trying to get some help. So she told this guy that he was my dad, told him, like, hey, he needs to go see me and all this other stuff. He's been gone long enough, all these things. So that's how he ended up showing up into my life.
What was he? He was dad or not?
He is not. He is not my father.
Oh,
he's not my father. So I'm named after this guy. He's not my dad.
What move is that?
Right? Yeah. And that's what I said. I said, Mom, you have done some interesting things. But, you know, my mom was, you know, she literally would sacrifice anything for her kids. And later, you know, as I come to find out, of course, I was upset with her because that has scarred me for life, you know, up until this point, up until I got to the point where I could, you know, get over some of these things. But my father actually, another story is about to come, by the way. So people strap in.
Awesome.
So my father is actually the father of my oldest sister, Chandra. So that's actually my dad too. Now he says he's taking a DNA test at some point, but he wasn't there anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But he's actually in prison for a triple murder. So interesting story here is when I was looking to establish a relationship with him, he was in Florida and he had moved back to Rochester. So I was like, okay, I want to establish a relationship with this guy. And I had seen him a couple of times, didn't really think anything of him being my father. I just would go with my sister whenever she would go. And I pick him up. And when I picked him up, it's like, okay, we're going to spend a day together. Right. And this is after I got out of the jail. And they had still put me on probation. So I had 6 months that I had to be good, or else I had to do my time and all this other stuff. So we pull up to a gas station, stop at a gas station. I'm like, I need to fill up. SWAT team hops out and they're like, get on the ground. I'm like, what I didn't do anything. I thought I violated probation somehow. Yeah. But I look under the car and I look at him and we lock eyes. And he knew what was happening because he just shook his head, right? He just shook his head and I'm like, what did I do? And they're like, we don't want you. We want him. I'm like, what the heck? And they take me in to interrogate me. And now this was, talk about a painful moment, man. I'm getting interrogated by the cops. And they're like, what do you know about this guy? You know, we've been watching him for a while for this murder. And they're like this and that. And I'm like, you know more than I know, right? And this is supposed to be my father. Now imagine having to tell them that, right? So that, of course, I'm like,
that's tough.
In pain. Right. And every time I would try to speak to him on the phone or go see him, I would cry. I could never get over that moment, man. It stuck with me for years, up until probably about 5 years ago, where I could finally speak to him. And we had this conversation. This is something I've been doing in my healing journey, is having conversations with people I felt have impacted me in some way, shape, or form. And when I asked him why, you know, where he was and what was going on, he pretty much said, hey, I just couldn't do it anymore, right? Like he was blaming everyone else for what was going on. And that says a lot of about a person's character when they can't take accountability for what's going on. So, that conversation was good for me, but it also said, all right, I know what I don't want to do. I know what I don't need to do. So in that, it made me realize, like, all the people I've heard or caused trauma to or caused discomfort to, I went back and just spoke to as many of them as I could to say, hey, I apologize. On my journey of healing, I may have hurt you, right? And if I did, I want to apologize for that. Right? Here I am now in a better space. So I just want to talk to those who are willing to speak with me, right? So that was just a part of my process. And that may help some people, some of the listeners who are listening, to say, have those tough conversations, right? That's been the theme of all this, is have those tough conversations with as many people as you can before it's too late, because you really want to identify who you are, identify what could have been your triggers or your traumas. And really, that's a good part of your healing process, is to just learn about those people, apologize to people, take accountability for your part in whatever has taken place. I think once you can do that, that will allow you to move forward. So you're not staying in those spaces, wondering and thinking of the what ifs and all those other things, because you can't move forward if you're stuck in the past.
Totally. Amazing stories, man. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And that,
pleasure, brother.
Yeah, there's a lot. So I guess to go back to your brush with the system when so you're in jail, you hadn't been sentenced yet.
Mm-hmm.
You were looking at those 7 years. What happened with that situation? Did you end up taking a plea, or how did that get resolved?
Yeah. So good question, man. So it got resolved. So really the only thing that saved my butt, and again, God, but the victims had never showed. They never showed. I think I had like 4 court dates, and the prosecutors, of course, we've seen cases where they just keep you locked up, right? No matter what's going on. Unfortunately, Khalif Browder, if you're familiar with that, right? He was locked up in Rikers for like years. And there was no evidence, no anything. And unfortunately, he took his own life after he got out. He just couldn't bear the pain. But I was fortunate. The prosecution dropped the case after that. They were just like, hey, we're going to put you on probation. You have 6 months. If you do anything, you're going to do this whole time. So just the victims not showing really saved me. And that was it.
Wow. And then fast forward to a situation where you're on the floor, you look over at your dad, and then you're in, these guys are, I assume they're men, interrogating you. And yeah, it's just interesting, man, because you navigated your way through those situations and, went on to build a successful life. But there are so many kind of horror stories about the criminal justice system. Right. And also the conversation about systemic racism within the system.
Right. So
it's just interesting to hear you were able to navigate it, and I'm so happy, but I guess after having, with all of those factors, that conversation about the criminal justice system, is that something that you're kind of inspired to be an activist around for say, perhaps? Is that a good word for it? Or is that something that, that's not your area where you're going to, that's not where your passion lies, for example, because there are other areas where you're more motivated?
Oh, I'm definitely passionate about it, man. So there's a few organizations I've been doing some work with. And one of the things I'm looking to do now that my business is growing into the space where, it's starting to get noticed, is go into the prison systems and speak to the prison population, and just, to reintegrate for those that do get that opportunity is very tough. It's a tough thing. It's not easy. And a lot of people, especially, you've done 10, 20 years of your life, that becomes what you know. So I've coached a few people who've done like 20 plus years. I do that pro bono. So if anyone knows anyone who's been in that situation, who's done, that type of time, and they're looking to reintegrate, I send them my way, right? I don't charge them for any of the coaching sessions because I know how tough that is. And really that reintegration takes place I'm familiar with that because of my time in the military, right? Coming from a deployment, it's the same type of process. Institutions, when you're institutionalized in any way, shape, or form, your mind is accustomed to a certain style of life. You're accustomed to rules, regulations. You know where you're supposed to be. You know where you're going to eat. Know these certain things, right? So to get out of that and come back into society, which is not structured like that, which doesn't just flow, you're not told everything you need to do. It's tough. It's very tough. And that's why, when you ask a lot of people who are lifelong criminals or whatever, they say, I'm at home here. Like, the world is hard. The world is scary.
Mm-hmm.
Here, I got 3 hots in the cot, right? I know exactly where I'm supposed to go, so that mindset, it's a damaged mindset. So that's why I want to get in there more and go to whatever prisons allow me to speak. I'm actually trying to get into the one where my father is. He's upstate New York, and I want to speak there. So I've contacted the chaplain there to see how that works. And they're still dealing with COVID in their own way. So I'm looking to identify that. So anyone who's listening who works with the prisons or, knows a way to get in or knows some prisons that I may be able to speak at, let me know, reach out to me, because that would be great. And there's also an organization called the Sentencing Project that I used to do some work with. And when I say used to do work, I just would volunteer, reach out to different lawyers or whatever I needed to do. And I did that briefly while I was in New York City. So that was I did that for probably about 6 months or so. But I definitely want to do more of that type of work because it's very important, especially in the Black community. So many of our fathers, our brothers, our friends have done time in some way, shape, or form, unfortunately. And it's just tough. It's, a lot of people say, oh, when you come out, you have this, but it's not that easy. It's not, there's a lot of things, a lot of dynamics that take place when you've done time that you need to get over. I mean, you don't know what's happened to them while they were in there either. So, I'm definitely passionate about that.
That's awesome, man. I am becoming more too, the more I educate myself and learn. And I've been thinking about ways to get involved. Yeah. And that seems like a good one because it affects so much of people's lives. You disenfranchised, harder to get a job, every job application you have to fill out a form. And there's like the external nuts and bolts things that impact access to resources. And then also internally, as far as the psychological challenges of reintegrating and also the way that people are treated in society.
Right.
But cool, man. Yeah. And just to bring it back again, I think what we were talking about as far as kids and what I've been reading and listening to, it seems like I just read this great book about the inner child and how it affects, actually it was specific to like porn and sex addictions. Mm-hmm. I had a guy on, a psychologist, and it seems to be that kids, whenever something adverse happens, the only thing, or the paradigm they look at it through is, oh, it must have been something that I did wrong, or there's something wrong with me, therefore this adverse situation happened. So yeah, I think that's a great lesson for parents and future parents about. It's hard. It's hard too. I can imagine like every day of the year, it's hard to like remember that filter and not say the wrong thing, but it does. Yes. It sticks with us, right? These situations and things that are said.
Yep. And that's that inner child. I'm glad you brought that up, Thomas, because I speak a lot about inner child healing. Now, I've been learning more about it as I've gone through my own healing process. And when you think about it, it sounds weird, right? People are like, inner child, what are you talking about? But a lot of what we go through is actually from back then, like you were saying, like that filter. The influences, like when we first started the conversation, all the influences you get, the way you believe, the way you look at yourself, those things come into play. If someone once told you, hey, you'll never amount to anything, what's the one thing you hear a lot of people say, like, my teacher told me this, that's because that sticks in your mind. And it's really hard to change that if people, authoritative figures, your parents, your guardians have told you these negative things. Like for me, like when my mom said it was a mistake, I took it and I filtered it into what I thought she meant. Right. So that's why I think it's so important to go back to your inner child and be like, hey, We're good now. We're strong. We can make our own choices and have those conversations and then to go back and have those conversations with those people if you can, because that allows you to take back some of that power for yourself. It allows you to say, hey, I am an adult. I am in control. I have agency over my life now. I will not let this thing that's taking place back then control me. And it's the same thing with traumatic experiences. We oftentimes forget about any of those things. It just glosses over it. We don't realize that was trauma. The term trauma is just now becoming a thing, especially in the Black community. We're just now starting to understand that PTSD is not just for the military. It is for anyone, right? Anyone who's gone through these traumatic phases. And especially for men, a lot of times we're told to just suck it up. Unfortunately for like sexual trauma victims, a lot of people don't believe them. If it's someone that they were close to in the household or a family member, people get upset with them and they victim blame, right? So there's so many of these types of things that take place where healing is hard, right? Healing is hard, and you start looking at it as your fault. And that's when you start internalizing that pain. Like it was something I did. So I can't even blame this person, and then you hold on to that and you carry it through your life. And then you wonder why your relationships fail. You wonder why you self-sabotage. You wonder why, certain things just happen. You wonder why people end up in jail. It's because of this cyclical process. You're stuck in that, right? So the only way to change this is to have these conversations and to take action. And for the victim or the person that's going through it, just have that conversation. Find a professional. It may take you a couple of times, if you're going through therapy, to find the one that really vibes with you and the one that you feel is actually helping you. But don't give up. You still have life to live. Your life did not end in those situations. I know it's tough, but we just have to continue to look for healing. Healing is an ongoing process, especially when you've gone through something as detrimental to your mental and emotional well-being as being scarred as a child. But don't give up is what I would say.
I love it. A message of hope.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's so true about the therapist. I'm going through a healing process with someone close to me, and as part of it, I was like, go to therapy, ask these questions, and if it doesn't work, go to the next one.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not a guarantee. I actually I have through my work, one session a month, which actually is working for me. It's kind of like a check-in, get some stuff to do. But I found this guy as a therapist who's like so matter of the fact. And he just, I think I've learned that like what works for me is kind of the mirror, and the mirror approach, and then a little bit of tough love. And that kind of gives me the kick in the butt that I need.
Yeah.
I'll basically go to him with like, oh, I'm feeling this way. Like, I think, and he's like, if you're asking me, like, it's wrong. Like, what are you doing?
Right. So you found what works for you, but it definitely takes time. And a lot of people don't realize that there's a lot of different methods to therapy, right? But you have like talk therapy, you have like mind body connection therapy, spiritual therapy. So you really have to find and just play around with the different types of modalities. Like for you like that straight up. Like, hey, man, why are you even sitting in my chair talking about this right now? You know what you need to do. You like that. For others, they may need a softer approach, So,
for sure.
Just, and that's a couple of questions you can ask. Like, what do you specialize in? Do you specialize in childhood trauma, sexual trauma, whatever you need to start with that? And find people who specialize in those, and then just drill it down. Maybe there's different types of, therapies like rational emotive behavioral therapy, or maybe you need acceptance behavior therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy. There's so many different types of things. Dialectic therapy, so just drill down after you found out like what issues you're looking to talk about and solve, because that way, there's someone who can not just sympathize, but they can empathize and connect with you on that level and allow you to get that space to feel comfortable speaking about these things with them. And another thing is, speaking of comfort, is the first few sessions, it actually usually takes a while for someone to get comfortable in therapy. So don't just stop after like the second session. It's going to take you a bit to get to that point. Typically, you might just hit it off from the jump, but it usually takes a little while.
For sure. Okay, so going back to your intro story, and you went overseas. So you said you went to Kuwait?
Yep, Kuwait and Afghanistan.
In Afghanistan. So how did that feel? Or I guess at that point, were you still practicing Islam?
So I can't say I was practicing. It was still my faith base, but I can't say I was praying 5 times a day and, Ramadan and all that. I would just, it was just my foundation, I would say.
Okay. So how was that?
If you looked at my dog tags, it said Islam, but I was not a practicing Muslim.
To go over to the Muslim part of the world must have been interesting. How did that feel?
It was actually a very mind-opening experience because when you go to the Middle East, you hear about so many different things, especially Afghanistan. You hear about so many different things. And of course, you're in the military, you get mortared every day and all these other things. But outside of that, like when you meet the people, like the actual people who are from there, who are not, the Taliban or any of that, they are just people trying to survive. They are so kind because Islam is actually a religion of peace. And they are very welcoming into their spaces. Like if you come to their home, they're going to show you, some meals, some tea, welcome, very welcoming, very just way different than what you would hear about. And I knew that growing up in the faith, but just going there and seeing the country for what it really is. It's actually a beautiful country. They have mountains. They have all different types of terrain. It's like if you went to California, right? If you went up the coast, you see all different types. Afghanistan is very similar to that. So the south is like desert. And then to the west, you have like vegetative states. I had the privilege of being able to travel around the country. Cool. I served as the health information systems officer there. So just being able to meet different people, and they would come on base for like healthcare and stuff like that as part of the hearts and minds. The military would give them healthcare if they had sickly or anything happened to them, as exchange for being in those villages, because you're building bases in the middle of their village, right? So that was very interesting to just be able to communicate with them on that level and learn from them like how they were feeling. Having those types of conversations with them about everything, about the war, about the military being there, etc.
Totally. How did you process things when the U.S. and allies withdrew last year and now the Taliban's back in control? How did that settle with you?
Yeah. This was something that they were processing for years now. So you knew it was coming. And you seen what happened in Iraq. It's the same thing. Like when we decided to pull out, they were right back in control. And now we went back over there with a smaller force as trainers and advisors, which is the role we've been in for years, apparently, supposedly. But it's one of those things where as someone who's served there, and definitely more for, most who've lost, lives, lost limbs, family members, etc. It's definitely one of those feelings like, was that for nothing? But then you have to remember that it was never meant to be a forever
permanent
thing, right?
Yeah.
And the longer we stayed over there, like it was just a Band-Aid. There was no way to fix that. You can't change beliefs like that. You can't now. And the more you stay there, it's just building in the back end. Like, we was talking about Al Qaeda being on the low. They were just waiting. It's a waiting game, right? And they were just like, hey, we're going to take control as soon as you leave, as you see. And as we were there, all they were doing was brainwashing more and more people to say, hey, you see what they're doing to our country, this and that, right? So it was a lose-lose as soon as we went over there. And that's typically how it is for war. As soon as you occupy a foreign land, you have to be ready for that, where you say, yeah, we're going to do what we can and help as many people as we can. But at some point, you have to leave because we have our own soil to protect and we have our own issues here. And wars are expensive, super expensive. So at some point you have to cut that and say, okay, what did we make any change? And the answer when I look back to it is, I can't really say that we did. I can't say that we did.
Totally. Yeah. And I mean, even if looking at the Russian invasion, like even if Russia takes over Ukraine, they'll always have to be looking over their shoulders because the Ukrainian people will never accept that occupation, right? They're not going to stop fighting or, you know, even if it becomes like guerrilla warfare, you know,
exactly. You get militias and all these other things that come about. And then it becomes really tough. But now the battle we were facing, like, okay, who's the enemy? And you don't know until they shoot at you, right? And that's really the hardest part of it, because you don't know who the enemy is. You're walking through a village, you know, everybody has AKs, even little kids, you know, and you're like, okay. So when we first went over there, it's like, okay, you just shoot anybody you feel is threatened, but then you have to have rules of engagement. And with the rules of engagement, you know, everyone's walking around with these weapons. So there was a thing about hard target, soft target. So a soft target, their weapon is down. Hard target, they're actually looking at pointing at you. And even as a hard target, you still can't just shoot them, right? You still can't. You have to wait for them to take action. And now you imagine that you're walking through villages and all these people are looking at you. You're like, okay, who's next, right? Who's going to be the person that fires? So you don't really know. So that's probably more nerve-wracking than the actual, you know, getting into it, because you're like, okay, I don't know where this threat is coming from. And as you're walking, it could be IEDs that they could detonate, anything, a piece of trash. Like, so when you come back, again, that reintegration, when you come back after all of that, you know, I'm what you call hypervigilant. So if I walk outside, I'm looking up, I'm looking around, you know, I'm making sure people aren't looking out the window still. And that's a thing that, you know, you have to work on. And, you know, if I go to a restaurant, I'm automatically looking for the egress points, or, you know, subconsciously I'm sizing everybody up to see who will be the largest threat, you know, stuff like that. And that's really what takes a lot of time to work through when you go into situations like that. So it's an interesting dynamic, man. You could do whole case studies on these things. For sure. And people do.
So what's that acronym? Egress, an exit of some sort, or? Yeah,
like the exits, egress points, like where you can leave. Like if something took place, like where would you go? Like what's the fastest way out of there to get to safety? Especially if I'm with like family or something like that. I just look for those points. So it's just a thing that sticks with you, and you can look to control it to a certain extent, but one of those things that it really does become a part of you, no matter. I'm a mindset coach, but it's still something that subconsciously I'm doing, right? I'm looking all around, walking my dogs. I'm looking up, like if it's an apartment building, I look at all the floors, see who's up, see if there's balconies, any windows open. You know, I'm doing all of that stuff. And then when I first came home, it was like, you see some trash on the side, you walk around, you know, you like go out, you bubble out. And then like if you come, you know, in the military, they teach you, if you're pieing a corner, like if you come around the corner, you go out a little bit so you can see. Because when you clear in a corner, so you have your muzzle, you don't want them to be able to grab your muzzle. So you kind of stick out from the wall a little bit so you can see. Because if you're too close, either they can get you here, and plus you don't have that viewpoint, that vantage point. So they see you coming around before you can see them. So there's a lot of things you just think about, you know, when you come back through the military, back into society.
Man. Like, because on one hand, that's useful, right? Like, you're not going to be caught surprised, and obviously, like, you're going to protect your family really effectively. But also, that's not. Maybe you don't want that level of awareness all the time.
Right, that's it, man. Because you're like, why the heck? I'm good. Like, there's nothing happening, right? And you're like, I'm sitting here like pieing corners and stuff, and they're like, what are you doing? It's like, you know, you just think you have to stop and think like, all right, man, I need to chill. Like, I don't need that. We're just walking in the neighborhood, right? Like, so, but yeah, it's one of those things that it can get tiring because you don't want to be heightened all the time. Right? You're just looking around. You're paranoid, really, to a level that's just unhealthy. So you want to bring that down, and through therapy, you get it to a point where it's better. But it's sticking with you, right? It's in the subconscious mind. So it takes like a conscious effort to pay attention to those things.
Cool, man. So that gets to the point of, because again, on like the masculinity topic, physical power and how to safely navigate the world as men and a powerful men, like physically, in the sense of, you're trained, but even if someone's not trained, if they're just a man, at that point they have the ability to, physically overpower other people, and that can be used kind of like Peter Parker, like great power, great responsibility, right? And that can be a positive force, or it can be a negative force. So how do you approach that in your personal life? And, how do you kind of, and this is something that could help the men out there who are listening, navigate the world with that space and use it as a way to help other people feel safe, and also hold space for other people and understand that it could be triggering for them, or, they could have been abused or hurt by men previously.
Right. And that's a great point, man. Like, you never know what someone has gone through and what you remind them of. So I always say, like, serve with it from a place of compassion. Like, come from a place where you look to understand before you jump to your conclusions about someone. Look to understand them a little bit more on a deeper level. See if you can ask them questions just to learn more about them before you judge them, before you just put those preconceived notions or label them in your own right. Because sometimes people act defensively, and they may not even know that they developed this defense mechanism. It's just a way to keep them safe. So, none of us are perfect, and we all have our own ways that we do that we protect ourselves, so to speak. So have those conversations, and, start where that person is. Like, don't treat them how you want to be treated. Treat them how they want to be treated. So it's better to just talk about these things. It's better. And if they don't want to, don't force it, right? Don't make your agenda theirs, because you need to know, like, what matters to them, who they are, and serve them from that perspective. And a lot of times as men, we get upset because we're like, I need to know this. I want to talk about this, because we're like, we're want to be a dominant force. But that can really hurt people in ways we don't understand. Like you were saying, like, they could have been traumatized by a man that looks like you, but you don't know that. So when you're hawking and you're yelling at them, they may shrink, and they may be trying to protect themselves because you're taking them back into that space. So you have to be really mindful of that, that you don't know everyone's story. So when they act weird to you, it may be because something has transpired in their lives and they're just not comfortable anymore. So you don't have to shrink who you are, but just be a person who's understanding. Don't always look to be, the authority. Listen, and don't listen to respond. Listen to understand what this person is coming. Listen to the things that are not being said, because that's where a lot of the information lies, right? Someone could be saying one thing, but their body language could be saying something completely different. And that's what we have to start paying attention to. Before that person is finished, a lot of times we're forming our sentence. And that's just not where we need to be. We need to be in a place where let that person finish. And you can say, like, notice, I'll say, yeah, right. That's just showing that I'm paying attention, acknowledging, but, just acknowledge that person, show respect, show that what they say matters. Watch your posture. Don't always be in a position, a power posture, as they call it, like where you have your arms crossed and stuff like that. Look that person in the eye, ask them, if it's your partner or someone, family member, if they need support or something's going on, ask them how you can be of support. Don't assume that they want you to solve the issue, because a lot of men do that, right? We want to be problem solvers, but we can't assume that that's what's needed. That's what's required. Sometimes it's just listening, letting them vent, and they work through the problem. So there's a lot of things. This could be a whole topic in itself, brother, because there's so much about communication and doing it effectively that comes into play here, because most of us are not taught that. We're not taught how to communicate on a level where we are coming from a place of understanding and empathy. We're just taught, hey, get your point across, right? Be authoritative, be assertive. When that's not necessarily the case, it's not what's needed in all conversations.
Totally. I'm not sure where I heard it, but since I've started the podcast, I heard this great line to ask someone, and I use this with my partner a lot. I ask her, do you want me to listen or do you want me to help problem solve?
Exactly.
Because that helps me check myself and know which lane to get in, and also communicates to her that I'm trying to check myself and not just, mansplain, right?
Yeah.
Or just
Exactly.
try to be helpful, but be annoying. Yeah.
Exactly, man. And that's why it's important to do that, to level set and be like, hey, what lane do you want me to be in? Do you want just support, or you do, like you said, do you want me to problem solve, or you want me to just listen? Is a great question. And then, you can mirror back sometimes to let that person know you're listening to what they're saying and you're just looking to understand. So you can use things like, what I heard you say was this, is that right? Just to make sure that you're listening, is the mirror technique, as they like to call it. Or you can paraphrase sometimes. Don't do it all the time because that will get annoying. But when you are looking for more understanding to verify before you get to a place, right? You don't want to become a parent and they're just like, all right, are you mocking me? But
I heard you say it was pass the chips. Is that right?
Right. Like, you heard what I said. But a lot of times in deeper discussions, that's required because, we get upset before we actually understood what was happening. Because again, we're looking at it from our perspective, but try to see if you can do it from there, understand their point and see what the jewels are in the conversation. Because a lot of times when people are upset, they're not articulating it the way they want to. So that's where it's really, really important to take that breath before you speak, even if you got to take a few minutes. And that's one of the keys, is setting boundaries in conversations. Before you get to those points, set those boundaries. And communicate those with the people, like, hey, when, especially if it's your spouse, you say, hey, when it's a heated discussion, we got to have a way where, we could take a moment if no one's hearing each other, where we say a certain word or something like that, where we know we're not even listening anymore. Learn those types of things so you don't say something you don't want to say. So you don't do something you don't want to do, right? Learn how to calm yourself. I talk with my clients a lot about placing an interrupt between the situational response and the emotion, and then what you do, right? Because if you have that emotion, if you have that situation or that circumstance take place, you need to be able to respond instead of react, because the reaction is what gets us in trouble. When we have that knee-jerk reaction and we say something that we didn't want, or we did something out of anger, now you can't take that back. And a lot of us get in trouble with that. So you have to be able to take that breath. You have to be able to step away and come back when you're good, whatever it is. But set those boundaries within you and with that person if you can.
For sure, man. And that's hard to do.
Yeah, it is. It is. One of the best things you can do is a breath, a deep breath in and a deep breath out, because you could do that anywhere. If you just close your eyes before you respond, because anger and all these emotions, there is a physical response. So it's literally hard to get upset if you don't let your body start tensing up. And if you notice like how you respond, right? So for instance, your eye may start jumping or your palms may start sweating. You'll get a physical reaction typically before you get to that breaking point. So once you start paying attention to that, then you got to see your signs. Like, you'll know, like, all right, I'm starting to get upset. I got to walk away. All right. I have to. And if that person is like, no, be like, yeah, listen, I'm not this conversation. I can't have it right now. Right. And just go. If you got to just walk off, it's better than doing something that you're going to regret. Just be like, hey, I had to remove myself from that issue. I noticed my palms was getting sweaty. I noticed my eye was jumping. I noticed I was tearing up, whatever it is. I noticed I started shaking. I was not in a place to listen to you. And it was just going to be bad from there. So like, pay attention to those physical responses, because anger is a physical emotion. Like, you literally start tensing up, your muscles get tight, because you're just like the fight or flight, right? Your body is preparing for that battle. So you just have to pay attention to those things. And it'll help you. You'll see that it'll help you as you learn how to pay attention to those nuances.
Well said, man. Thank you.
My pleasure.
So we're coming up on time, so we'll jump over to the Spark by Seek Discomfort conversation game here. Before we do that, Jevon, I wanted to ask for book recommendations. I'm going to guess that you're a well-read guy and you have some interesting books to recommend. So what would you say, like top 3?
Sure. Top 3. One is The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. That is one of my favorite books. Speaking on the topics of like trauma and things like that, getting over trauma. The Body Keeps the Score. I always forget his name, but The Body Keeps the Score is a very popular book. And then what happened to you is another book by Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey. That's a fairly recent book. Those would be my top 3. And I just got to do my shameless plug is
yeah.
I would say get my book, right? Own Your Kingdom, How to Control Your Mindset So You Can Control Your Destiny. And this is, it's not a fluff book. And that's why I would say that it's a book that these are tools I use on my journey of healing. So I definitely would say it's it's been helping a lot of people.
Awesome, dude. Thank you for doing that work.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Okay, we'll jump over. Do you want to go first or second?
I will go first since the pressure. I'm putting the pressure on.
Oh, man, look at that bravery.
Yes, sir. So what makes a place feel like home to you? Name 3 things. Oh, that is a good one. I like this game already, man. So what makes a place feel at home to me is the ability to be myself without judgment. Right? That's one of the things that's very important to me, to be able to be authentically you and not feel judged. Psychological safety. Number 2 would be a place that I can learn, a place where I have a space where I am challenged to be my best self and positively. Number 3 would be support. I have support there, where if I'm having tough times, if my depression or anxiety or something is acting up, I have someone there that can support me and I can speak to them about anything, and they will not look at me differently. So those will be my top 3.
Awesome, man. So psychological safety, the ability to learn and grow, and affirming support structure.
Yes. Well said.
Interesting, man. That's cool. That's cool that they're all, well, it's a flexible list, right? Because there's nothing about physical dimensions at all.
Right. Yeah, I think, I think the physical structure is not important as far as that for me, because I think physically, you really only need a certain things that have comfort, but mentally and emotionally, that's where it really feels like home, because physical is just a house to me. It's just a place of residence.
Awesome. Okay. Oh, interesting. Okay, so my question is, how have my religious views changed over the years? Yeah, that's cool. Kind of what we talked about.
Yeah.
So I grew up Roman Catholic household. So yeah, my parents both grew up with that religion. Their parents were pretty devout. My dad's parents still are, practicing Catholics. And I would say we grew up going to church pretty often, just about every Sunday. And similar to you, I can only remember a few times where I truly, spoke to God in a time of need. One of them, this says a lot about me. I remember this clear as day. I was in grade school and I had this huge crush on this girl and I was praying to God. I was like, God, please, just show me a sign. Is it on or not? Does she love me or no? Which tells you, I think, everything you need to know about
that
me.
Is how many of us said that prayer though? Come on.
Yeah. For sure. Oh my God, that's so funny. So, but then, yeah, I never believed, I guess is the word, or it never resonated with me as far as the buying into it or feeling aligned with it. And then we stopped going, and yeah, I think looking back, I'm really grateful for the morality, at least on paper. You know, the child sex abuse stuff with the Catholic Church has definitely been a turnoff. And also, as I've gotten older, kind of looking at the institution, I feel like it's kind of dogmatic, and there's a lot of things about it as far as kind of telling women what to do with their bodies, not supporting, you know, same-sex love. Those things are kind of hard for me to kind of buy in as far as the institution, but I think religion in general has such a powerful and positive impact on the world. And I think for people to find purpose through it is extremely valuable. So I'm open-minded to it, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's definitely well said, man, and a great discussion to have. And you know, I'm aligned with you on that. And I think that when it comes to religion, I'm all for people having beliefs, but I just challenge people to really, you know, have their own values and their own alignments too, because you know it's one of those things like we mentioned. We were talking about you know, Islam and the Middle East and all that stuff. And when you think about it, there a lot of people use religion for power and control. So you just have to really, you know, question things that you don't understand and really have those discussions within yourself. Like, okay, what aligns with me? You know, what do I want to learn more of? What do I challenge? What do I not? And just have that within you, because, you know, the Taliban and Al Qaeda, you know, KKK, they're all based on religious views, right? That they've skewed to be radical. So it's definitely one of those things we could, you know, we just have to learn on your own. And that's what I say too. I'm just open to learning because religion can be beautiful, and it is. It's, you know, explains the unexplainable for a lot of us, and gives us purpose. So definitely.
Yeah. The other thing too about the Catholic Church specifically, I could never get behind an institution that intentionally excludes women from leadership. To me, it's wrong, and it's also dumb.
No, I actually never even thought about that they exclude women from leadership. That is, that's a very great point. Yeah.
You know, I think the current Pope proposed at one point women deacons, but yeah, as far as the priests and, you know, the Pope, imagine that, you know, it's like, so it's, you know, so and with all this stuff too, I kind of also like with other white people, you talk about like white community problems, like talking about privilege and how do we spread the power and kind of like affect positive change. And I use the argument of if it morally doesn't motivate someone, like the net positive effects of introducing more people to resources is good for everyone, because we have more minds, more talent, more opportunity, and the greater good is raised because there is more talent in the resource pool, if you will. So I try to also use like a literal persuasion argument with people. If the morality aspect isn't motivating enough for them, then I try to make it more kind of practical. Same thing with an institution like the church. It's like if you had women in leadership, you would have such a better perspective on problems and challenges. How do we adapt? How do we stay relevant? So,
diverse thinking is important in every aspect, for sure.
Yeah,
and we're seeing that even in corporations, right? Or diversity, equity, inclusion, they talk about all the time. But it's just, you know, diverse thinking breeds innovation, and it breeds insight that you wouldn't have otherwise.
For sure. Awesome. Well, Jevon Wooden, it's been an absolute pleasure, man. Thank you so much for sharing openly and sharing your wisdom and experiences with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Thomas. Thank you for sharing wisdom to me. You definitely this was a great conversation, man.
Thanks, dude. Where can the folks find you, or if they're interested to kind of check out your work?
For sure. They can find me on all social media platforms at Live Not Loathe. That's LIVENOTLOATHE. And you can also go to my website, which is livenotloathe.com. Sign up for the daily newsletter.
Nice. What's with that name too? That's intentional, I'm sure. The name there.
Yeah, man. Thanks for asking. So it's really to symbolize the transformation. A lot of people loathe life, or they loathe themselves, which is like hating it. They don't like what's happening in it. and they lose the fact that there is some things they can do to control that, right? So that's just demonstrating the transformation of, instead of loathing life and just going through the monotony, the things that you just do not enjoy at all, find a joy in your life and start living again. Not just being alive, but actually living, doing things that bring that joy and that happiness and that fulfillment back to you.
Beautiful, man. You're doing the good work. Thank you.
Thank you, man. Thanks for having me once again.
For sure. Thanks, Jevon. Have a great day, dude.
You too, brother.